Hey, welcome everybody. This is the Strega Mystica, Gian Michael Salvato, and you're watching our continuing series on Stregoneria, Italian folk magic and witchcraft. And this topic, it's been a while since I've been doing one of these live, so hopefully you will enjoy this and find it as informative as it's something that many of you have asked for. The topic tonight is going to be deconstructing popular myths in Italian folk magic and Italian witchcraft. So let's go ahead. Let me turn the camera off so that I'm out of the way, and we'll get started in just a second. So let's take a look at how the problem started. Charles Leland was one of the most brilliant folklorists of the 19th and 20th centuries, and he visited Italy around 1899, and he produced a document that was called the Gospel of the Witches, or the Vangelo. Now, the Gospel of the Witches was purported to have been given to him by a woman named Maddalena, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But what is important next is that by 1939, another old white guy talking about, Anglo-Saxon white privilege, by the name of Gerald Gardner is alleged to have been initiated into a mysterious coven that nobody has ever heard of with no proof of its existence to the present day. Several years later, he creates what becomes Wicca, a neo-pagan religion, and underlying that word religion, built around his misinterpretations of Leland's findings, as well as his misinterpretations of Murray's witch cults, claims, and his long connection to occultism, including the Golden Dawn, Rosicrucianism, Aleister Crowley, and so forth. So we fast forward to 2020, 2021, and modern witches in pop culture versions of witchcraft and neo-paganism all claim to be related to a European witch cult that likely never existed. And I'm going to prove why. Now, how do we know that Leland was wrong? Well, first of all, having been raised in the Afro-Sicilian and Italian traditions of folk magic and witchcraft, as well as having spent 20 years or more researching other regions of Italy and the folk magic of those regions, I'm certain that nobody in our tradition, nobody in our culture would speak of or teach or share our traditions outside of our family bloodlines until now. Now, there are a couple other researchers who do amazing work who've managed, like myself, to gain some of the confidence, gain some of the trust of certain practitioners who shared what their practices were. So some of the people that are doing that kind of research have really discovered more modern practices of Italian folk magic and witchcraft, like Segnatore and other neo-pagan inspired traditions. But when we talk about the real old world folk magic, the ancient practices, the pre-Christian church practices of our ancestors, when it comes to magic and witchcraft, very few people have managed to gain the trust of practitioners outside of their families. Now, also, having grown up in that tradition, I was also exposed to and understand intimately as an anthropologist and as an Italian, the Vecchia Religione, or the old religion. Now, they are two completely different things that often get conflated by pop culture witches and neo-pagans who like to pretend that the Vecchia Religione and the Vecchi Modi is the old way are the same thing. Now, Leland's Gospel of Aradia has nothing to do with witchcraft in the Italian tradition. And that's what we're going to talk about first. Why that is just absolutely the only sensible conclusion someone can come to, despite the fact that many 20th century and 21st century authors have made some nice bank by pretending otherwise. So this is what I think happened. Charles Leland, as I said, was a brilliant folklorist. And so I do believe that as he talks about, meeting this woman, Maddalena, that he may in fact have met somebody who said that they were a witch. I don't know how he would have identified that person, but he was a folklorist. And so he, for a living, he would tell stories. But according to his story, he met Maddalena, and she told him that she would take him to a boschetto or coven or grove of witches that he could see. She gave him this document allegedly called the Vangelo or the Gospel of Aradia. And so I believe that it's very likely, and this was in Tuscania, and it was very likely that Leland went with her to this boschetto, but that what he actually saw was what would normally happen in a boschetto. Boschettos are not a place for practicing magic or witchcraft. They never were in the ancient world. Only the Roman Church believed that. So that was an assertion made from outside our tradition by the Roman Catholic Church and later by the Anglican Church that witches met in groves or covens and practiced witchcraft. What a boschetto is a religious gathering. So now I'd like you to imagine never having been to a Catholic church, and you walk in and you see something like on the screen in front of you. Yes, that photograph on the right is yours truly, and you see a bunch of nuns on the left, all sitting in their pews, and you walk into this church you've never heard of or been to a Catholic church. Your natural assumption would be that everyone that you see there is Catholic and that all Catholics look like that and that they are practicing Catholicism. But a little bit later, maybe you see somebody walk in who is not dressed in a religious habit. Maybe you see other people and you assume that because the first group you saw were all nuns or priests, that all of these other people that are coming in are nuns and priests as well, because you don't know how a church works. So in your mind, everyone that you're seeing must be nuns and priests, and that you've walked into a monastery, and that assumption happens all the time. But the truth of the matter, as everyone who's been to a church knows, is that yes, there may be some nuns in that picture. There may also be some school teachers. There might also be some bakers and some doctors. There might also be some shopkeepers. Not everybody inside a Catholic church is a nun or a priest. And so it is when you stop and think about it in terms of what Leland saw. He went to this grove, and in this grove, this religious gathering that was the cult of Diana and Dianus, celebrated near Lake Nemi, he would naturally assume, maybe having met a witch or two witches or three witches in this boschetto, he would naturally assume that everybody there must have been a witch, that, oh, my great fortune, I've stumbled upon a coven of witches, and now I know how it's done. But the simple fact is that the boschetto would have welcomed him to an open liturgy, not to the private mysteries. So they would have been celebrating a liturgy, a religious celebration, a religious ritual, not a magical ritual, in which some witches might have partaken, some bakers, some school teachers, some physicians. And so just as in our example of the church, I believe that's what Leland experienced. However, he didn't connect the dots and didn't realize that not everybody that was at this religious gathering was a witch. And so he made the assumption, and then later reported that assumption, that he stumbled upon a coven of witches. And it's simple and understandable that he would think that, because again, that's the lie that the Roman Catholic and Anglican Church were feeding people for centuries by that time. And now we add in white privilege. Modern pagans have a tendency, in addition to pretending that witchcraft is a pagan religion, as opposed to a neo-pagan religious construct, to pretend that the world's languages and anthropology revolve around Old English. The pretense of academic prowess and an affected accent, as we see on some pop culture witches, especially some from New Orleans and Salem, do not a scholar make. Attempts by wealthy American white boys who claim to have figured it out seldom have a basis in true research or academia. So it's important that before we go further, we understand the first mention of witches was not made in Old English. So many of these pop culture neo-pagans love to throw around the word witche and how witche and wicca were the words that Gerald Gardner mispronounced as Wicca, and that's where it all comes from, and it all goes back to that coven that Leland found, and that's all utter nonsense. The first mention of witches happened more than 3,000 years before the Old English term witche and wicca were used. The first mention of witches, in fact, don't even refer to women, does not refer in any way, shape, or form to a religious gathering, and does not have anything whatsoever to do with covens, boschetti, groves, or any other kind of gathering. In fact, the first mention of witches speaks specifically of male practitioners of magic. And it's in the Code of Hammurabi, written about 3,700 years before the Common Era. In the Code of Hammurabi, we find that the belief in sorcery and its practice were widespread in the Near East and the Nile Valley, especially in Babylonia. A section from the Code of Hammurabi, from actually about 1754 before the Common Era. I apologize, it's 3,700 years from today, roughly. But the Code of Hammurabi prescribes, if a man has put a spell upon another man, and it is not justified, he upon whom the spell is laid shall go to the holy river, and into the holy river shall he plunge. If the holy river overcomes him and he's drowned, the man who put a spell upon him, i.e. the witch, shall take possession of his house. If the holy river declares him innocent and he remains unharmed, the man who laid a spell upon him, i.e. the witch, shall be put to death. He that plunged him into the river shall take possession of the house of him who laid the spell upon him. So what we're seeing right here is this prescription that would later be used in the witch mania that occurred in England and Scotland. But it says, if you believe that somebody put a spell on you, then you have to, the burden is on you. So you have to go to the holy river, and if you sink or drown, then the spell was justified. So this law does not say that witchcraft was the crime. The crime was unjustified cursing or unjustified hexes. And so if you claimed that the practitioner put a spell on you and it was not justified, and you went into the holy river and drowned, then the person who put the spell on you takes possession of your house. However, if the holy river decides you're innocent and you float, you don't drown, then the person who was unjustly hexed is able to have that witch put to death and shall take possession of all of that witch's property. A lot of people like to use the Old Testament, especially neo-pagans, love to use this trope. And Exodus does not mention witches or poisoners. This is actually used by neo-pagans to justify that there were witches spoken of in the Old Testament, and by Christians to try and demonize the practice of magic and witchcraft. The often quoted "thou shalt not suffer a witch to live" from the Jewish scripture has nothing to do with witchcraft. The prescription in Hebrew is against the one who whispers mystical phrases. It's not about poisoners, as often gets translated in English. This could easily refer to those from other spiritual traditions, whispering mystical phrases in other languages. In the book of Micah, we are told that such mystics would be eliminated from the people of Israel. Yet Deuteronomy refers to the use of divination by the Levites using crystals, as well as a silver chalice used for scrying, both magical practices. The book of Samuel speaks of enlisting the services of a necromancer to summon the spirit of a deceased prophet. So there is no shortage of witchcraft and magic spoken about in the Jewish scriptures. What's missing is a condemnation of that practice. Now, in other traditions, Islam, for example, prescribes against evil magic, that which doesn't come from gifts given to the practitioner by Allah. In Cameroon, Jambe is the term used for the craft, a force inside of a person which encompasses the occult, the transformative killing and healing. Bruja is an Afro-Caribbean religion and a healing tradition that originates from Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao. A healer in this culture is called a curioso or curado and refers to a man or woman who prefers little works, or trabu chiqui and trabau grandi. Little works and large treatments to promote or restore health, to bring fortune or misfortune, to deal with unrequited love and more serious concerns in which sorcery is required to find resolution. But let's go back to Italy and talk about Charles Leland's assertion and then therefore Gerald Gardner's assertion about his imaginary coven that he was supposedly initiated into. Understanding the diverse practices of Italy requires that we first look at the traditions that predate the Christian church. So remember, the term witch, strega, or witchcraft, stregoneria, was likely never used by our people to describe what we do. It certainly isn't used by anyone in my family to describe what we do until me, any more than it was used by any other traditions in any other languages prior to the Middle Ages. That was a word that was imposed upon us. It was an accusation upon us by the Christian church. So if we look throughout Italy in the Regione Piemonte, in Piedmont and the Aosta Valley, Moscone and Mosca are found, whose names probably derive from the Lombardy word masca, which indicates the soul of a dead man, or from the Provençal mascar, meaning to mumble in the sense of mumbling or uttering spells. According to tradition, the initiate inherits from grandmother to grandson or from mother to child their supernatural powers and the book of command, a library containing formulas and spells as a spellcaster. Now, in another region, Lombardy, witches are called strie, a word which derives from sfriaria, a dialectical term meaning witchcraft. Now, precisely in this region, in Bergamo, the mask of the Harlequin was born, which, according to some scholars, would testify to the cult of Bacchus, or Pan, or Luperco. In fact, its clothing and its appearance would recall the costumes of pre-Christian priests who smeared their faces on the occasions of some festivals related to the Roman Bacchus. And it's no coincidence that other Lombardy figures, such as the Krampus, depicted as demons in the company of San Nicolo, who traditionally are young men disguised as devils on the evening of December 5th, can also be linked back to Pan or Faunus in Latin. The same thing with Badalsic, a mythological being who lives in the woods in Lombardy mythos, represented as a big-headed being made of wood and covered with goat hair. Now, if we go to Veneto, in Veneto, the witches are called the Belle Butelle, the beautiful girls. In myth, they're associated with a type of fairy or water nymph. Sometimes they're only seen as entities of water, and both of these types say that these are the spirits of witches or magical spirits. According to tradition, they live in various natural cavities called busi or covoli that are scattered everywhere in the mountains and hills. They operate mainly at night, especially on full moons, and they retire, disappearing without leaving any trace in the morning. So you're starting to see now, as we get a little bit closer to Rome, you're beginning to hear, excuse me, some of the myths that might have informed some of the prejudices and rumors that the Roman Church would use. Now let's go up to Liguria. In Liguria, the witches are called Bague, Bague, or Bajore, and the sorcerers of the whole region are said to gather on the nights between Wednesday and Thursday, and those between Friday and Saturday, carrying brooms and sticks on which candles are fixed. Now, according to Romanazzi, the cult of the Great Mother has always been present in Ligurian territory, as has been the devotion to the Great Father, or Pan. In the countryside and in Molise, there is a particular variant of the witch called the Gennara, or the male equivalent Maione. The Gennara is a woman born on the full moon at Christmas who receives her magical knowledge on that day. According to the later belief, to find out who Gennara or Maione is, a person on Christmas Eve Mass enters the church dressed as a reaper. In fact, in this presence of the person who enters the church on Christmas Eve, a witch can't leave the building, thus revealing their identity. Another way of doing that is to take a lemon and hold it in your pocket, and during the Mass to scratch the lemon and make little digs with your fingernail in the lemon. And it's said that the witches won't be able to leave the church before you. So if you stay in the church after Mass, the one who is Gennare or Maione is going to be left. And elsewhere throughout Italy, we find similar stories. In Calabria, the sorcerers are called magari. They know the secrets of herbs and spells and jetties, which they know to both remove and to send magic. In Puglia, the witches are called masciare or stiare. According to legend, the stiare are women who have the power with the use of special ointments to turn cats and to turn into cats, and then go meet at night under a large walnut tree to dance and have fun. It's said that their interventions are harmful and can sometimes lead to death. And in traditional Apulian mythos, the Apulian dance, the pizzica, or the tarantismo, are subsequently Christianized by replacing Dionysus with St. Paul as the patron of the tarantulas, who were and those who were stung by the tarantula, according to the tradition, could only heal through dance. And you guessed it, that's where we get the tarantella. So now that we know all of the things that are not part of the Italian magical tradition and some of the myths and legends from the various regions, let's talk a little bit about what we did. For us, the practitioners of the ancient craft of the wise were healers and seers and midwives, both to the newborn and dying. We were herbalists, feminists, hexers, and necromancers. Now, the intellectuals of the 1600s in the Common Era and a movement within the halls of the Vatican would simultaneously drive our practices deeper and further into secrecy. Around this time, Illuminism arose as a belief that only the goddess of reason should be honored and it should be the replacement for the practice of magic. Romanticism attempted to revive a reliance and respect for the craft, but by that period, an organization known as the Benedante, who posed as a beneficent organization, had a malignant agenda, a very dangerous agenda under the patriarchy to consolidate all magical powers under the church. And then secular intellectualism began to gain a great foothold during that time. Positivism further drove our practices into secrecy, although their objectives were always very similar to ours, that science would lead the way. The only difference is that what we consider magic, the science is science that's yet to be fully understood, sort of the laws of the universe. Now, here's what we understand. We understand that magic is our worldview. It's not something we do, it's who we are. It exists all around us. In the 20th century, Einstein would refer to this vast reservoir of unquantifiable, unknowable energy that exists below the subatomic level. And he theorized that from this vast reservoir, all things manifest, both material and immaterial, both seen and unseen. Well, we understood that since the beginning of recorded history, and we understood that what magic is, what our practice of the craft is, has nothing to do with religion. It's simply working with the energy around a person, a place, a thing, a circumstance, a situation, and shifting that energy so that it conforms to our desired outcome or to our will. So what about paganism? Well, the word pagan comes from the Latin paganus, which originally simply meant country dweller or civilian. Now that word was co-opted by the Roman Catholic Church, which fancied its adherents to their religion as the quote-unquote army of Christ, which pejoratively referred to those who were not adherents, were not part of the army, naturally, as civilians, paganus. In the modern world, pagan is incorrectly used to refer to what would more accurately be described as neo-pagans, reconstructionists, and often revisionists who created belief systems around interpretations and misinterpretations of the ancient cults of the goddess and gods of antiquity beginning in the 1940s because they were told that what Leland found was a quote-unquote boschetto or coven of witches, when in fact what Leland found was a religious gathering. So what Leland found was what is referred to as the Vecchia Religione. We simply have no way of knowing if the stories of the Vecchia Religione in the Tuscan region are as old as our Italian legends claim. However, there's evidence among many families throughout Italy and Greece that devotions to the ancient mother, Uni, particularly at Lake Nemi, who would become Diana, date back at least 1,000 years before the Common Era, if not longer, and have continued in families and villages in unbroken succession. Some claim to this present day. Now, nowhere in any of the ancient traditions is this linked to witchcraft. Nowhere does it talk about this being the gathering of witches. Prior to the 14th and 15th centuries in the Common Era, this connection never existed. And again, it only exists because the Roman Catholic Church used it as a weapon against people. And I should say at this point that there are other forms of authentically ancient witchcraft and magic that really help to mete out and validate some of what I've just gotten done saying so that you can use a logic construct and draw the lines, connect the dots, that what the Roman Catholic Church did and what Leland did, and then later what those with really twisted agendas like Gardner and Grimassi and so forth would do, was really not accurate and may have been part of a more nefarious agenda that they were trying to promote, either to put money in their pocket or see women running around naked or whatever. So throughout the ancient world, we see other forms of ancient witchcraft and magic like brujeria, santeria, curandero, the African Inyanga and Isangoma, West African Obeya, Yinalushi, the Navajo skinwalkers. I probably slaughtered that, and I apologize to my Navajo friends. The Japanese Kitsune Mochi, Vetma in Russian tradition, Roma, and shamanism, just to name a handful. Now, let's take a look at 20th century witchcraft. And I want to say that 20th century witchcraft is a combination, for the most part, of religion, the old religion, and the old way. So it's a combination of magical practice and religion, and this merging of those two, which is done in ritual magic. It's a combination that draws on the concepts of mystery schools, so it's initiatory. And so it has become a separate thing that's unique to the 20th century, that didn't exist in the ancient world, and that there's no evidence to suggest that existed in the ancient world. But that doesn't make it invalid. It simply means the stories and lies and myths that are told about Italian folk magic being the predecessor to neo-paganism are just that. So there are many types of 20th century witchcraft. Alexandrian witchcraft claims to be an hereditary tradition, but offers no evidence to support such claims, quelle surprise, and appears to be suspiciously similar in content and philosophy to Gardnerian witchcraft. It was founded by Alexanders, and the word Alexandrian has no links whatsoever to ancient Alexandria, as many have erroneously suggested, especially on YouTube. It is, excuse me, a ceremonial magical tradition and religion into which aspects of witchcraft have been fully and rather beautifully interwoven. Cabot witchcraft is one of the most pragmatic of the modern witchcraft religions because it actually teaches the science and art of witchcraft taught with distinctively ancient accuracy, woven into the Celtic religion and woven into a cohesive tapestry of magic and religion and imagination that I think deserves much more credit than it gets. Not that Cabot witchcraft isn't problematic in some ways and in the practice and claims that some people have made, both on television and otherwise. Just recently, I saw an absurd claim by one of their high practitioners that Agnes Moorehead, for example, used to frequent the Magical Child or the Warlock Shop. This claim fell apart in many ways. One, because at the time that they were claiming she went to the Magical Child didn't exist. That's a witchcraft shop in New York City. Two, Agnes Moorehead died in 1974, and up until the day that she died, as my zio Rio, Leo Martello, would have, often remarked, because he knew her. She was vehemently against witchcraft. She didn't like it. She held it in disdain. She used to roll her eyes at it, essentially, that people would take the television show Bewitched as being, based in reality. She thought that was absurd, and yet she played the beloved Endora. But so we have to really be careful that we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater just because there are some wackadoodle and maybe unethical practitioners of a particular tradition. In this case, Cabot witchcraft. In other cases, Alexandrian witchcraft or Celtic witchcraft. Doesn't mean the traditions themselves are bad. Some of my dearest friends have created entirely new traditions spinning off from what they learned from Laurie Cabot, who was one of the pioneers in the 1980s to stand up to protect and speak out against the violence that many practitioners of magic and the old religion were experiencing. So I think it's important to remember that. Celtic witchcraft is an ancient hereditary practice in which many believe the religion and practice of the craft are inextricably woven. Another type of 20th century witchcraft is this neo-Dianic witchcraft, which weaves the neo-pagan revival of worship of the goddess Diana, or Uni, as she was known, with the 20th century interpretations of witchcraft believed to have been the more of a basis of folk magic traditions in the British Isles. Dianic witchcraft is often interwoven into this secretive mystery school religion, and often interwoven into that religion is the questionable mythos we talked about, that's presented in Charles Leland's Vangelo. Fairy is a neo-pagan tradition created by Gwydion Pedersen and Victor Anderson, inspired by Gardner's work, another beautiful tradition. Gardnerian witchcraft was created by Gerald Gardner, for whom I will, full disclosure, for whom I have zero respect, who claimed to have been initiated into a coven, never proven to have actually existing. Subsequently, the ethos, praxis, and mythological connection to antiquity would pervert the anthropological record, or attempt to anyway, and inspire many similar tales to be told in generations that follow. This tradition would give rise to many other traditions, including Wicca, Green Witchery, Eclectic, Saxon Magic, and so forth. And Stregoneria, which often gets conflated with Stregoneria, is a religion with no foundation in antiquity or modernity prior to its inception by an American Wiccan practitioner, Raven Grimassi, which bears zero connection to Italian witchcraft or folk magic, to say the least. And again, I want to repeat that new doesn't mean bad. Simply exposing an erroneous myth about neo-pagan traditions doesn't in any way invalidate their practice, tradition, or magic, period. Our hope is to inspire other magical practitioners to stop drawing lines in the sand and momentarily set aside their eyeliner long enough to realize how stupid they sound when they pretentiously claim that those whose practice is not ceremonially initiative or based around goddess worship, are not legitimately practicing witchcraft. And yes, there are videos on YouTube and Facebook and entire groups and covens that are formed around this idea. And I'd like to suggest that these pretentious people sit down, stay in their lane, and shut up, and allow magic to express itself organically in a diverse tapestry of practices and traditions. And finally, for those who insist, to the pretentious little boys whose white privilege inspires them to claim that one must worship the goddess and be initiated into a neo-pagan religion in order to legitimately practice witchcraft, or to call themselves a witch or warlock or whatever. If you're that certain of your absurd claims, again, in this video, I will challenge, come and visit me and allow me to clip a few locks of your hair, your nails, and a piece of your clothing. Otherwise, as we magically say in Philadelphia, shut the fuck up, Mary. So thank you for watching Witch Talks, Magic Worth Sharing. Again, this is John Michael Salvato, and for more information, you can visit stregabistica.com, and there are links at that particular website to all of my other social media connections, and to the website for the Inner Alchemy Mystery School, which we will also link to this video at the very end. Thanks again for watching. If you have any questions, put them in. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe. Make sure that you share this with folks that you think it might have value for, and click the notification bell if you'd like to know when we release our next video.